Hello, this is S.K. Williams, and today I would like to talk to you about package deal thinking and how it prevents reasonable discussion of political ideologies. As with many things, though, this is a topic that has applications outside of politics. Package deal thinking is not something that people engage in only with political beliefs. In fact, my first real engagement with package deal thinking, the first time I realized what it actually was doing what I normally do, especially when I was younger, and that is dealing with religion. I really noticed it when it came to militant atheists, which is not all atheists. It's the type that go on endlessly about how evil religion is, and how atheists are superior, and how Christianity has brought misery and death, and the God of the Bible is a genocidical tyrant, and all that usual rubbish that you hear in vilifying religion and religious people, and how awful it's been. And of course, they also love to remind you that it's irrational, illogical, it makes no sense, there's no evidence, and such like. Matt Dillahunty of the Atheist Experience is a good example of this, as is Aaron Ra, and of course you have the bigger names like Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris or Christopher Hitchens, and you have other lower named people like John Loftus and things like that. You know who I'm talking about. They're the typical type of militant atheist. But they're also the type that really got me to understand how some people lack any sort of nuance in their thinking whatsoever, and prefer a very simple, straightforward, black and white, us versus them narrative, which is odd when it comes to militant atheists, because that's what they claim religion fosters. One of the dangers of religion is that it promotes tribalism and an us versus them thinking, and atheists, having no religion, can transcend that, even though they have the us versus them, atheist versus religious person mentality. And militant atheists also seem to assume that being an atheist, even though they will insist is nothing more than a lack of belief in a god, and even though they will insist that atheists have nothing in common other than a lack of belief in a god, carries with it certain beliefs. Because in spite of saying that atheists have nothing in common but a lack of belief in a god, they will also drone on and on and on about what atheists believe, and it's quite clear that if you tell someone, I am an atheist, who is in that category, they will automatically assume you believe that science and religion are hostile to each other, and that science leads to truth. That as an atheist you're a champion of science. That as an atheist you hate religion and oppose it in favor of science. That you realize religion is bad, that you wish to argue against the Bible, that you see Christianity as evil, and so forth. They make certain assumptions about what you believe as an atheist. And they do the same thing with Christianity. For instance, there is a somewhat popular argument on the internet that effectively argues that Christianity has been proven wrong by science, because science has proven that free will doesn't exist. And this proves Christianity wrong because one of the central tenets of Christianity is that we have free will and can choose Jesus as our personal Lord and Savior. Without free will to choose Jesus as our Savior, Christianity cannot exist, and science has proven free will does not exist, therefore science has proven Christianity is not true. This ties in, of course, to the mythos that science and religion are at odds with each other and always contradict and are hostile, and that atheists are champions of science, and it works well when you have the science slaying the knight of science slaying the dragon of religion. But it doesn't work for multiple reasons. One of which, of course, being that science hasn't actually proven we have no free will, but even if it had, would that genuinely prove that Christianity is not true? Of course, if you accept the premise that one of the central premises of Christianity is that we have free will, and that Christianity requires free will to be effectively existent, and that if free will does not exist, then Christianity must by definition be false, then yes, if science proves we have no free will, Christianity cannot be true. After all, Christianity requires us to have free will in order to be true, and science has proven that not to be the case. But there are two major problems with this argument, and the first is that free will is not a central tenet of Christianity. Even churches that teach free will usually don't make it a central tenet. What's more, there are forms of Christianity that blatantly deny that we have free will. If I were, for instance, to tell you I am a Presbyterian, and as a militant atheist you were to argue that my religion was disproven by science because science has proven free will not to be true, and you have convinced me that science has indeed proven free will does not exist, why would I stop being a Presbyterian? The assumption the atheist makes is that all Christians believe in free will. This is because the Christian religion teaches it, and the Christian church tells you to believe in it. Of course, there is no such entity known as the Christian church, to which all Christians belong, and there are forms of Christian theology that simply don't accept free will. Lutherans don't accept free will, for example, and neither do Calvinists, and they're not the only ones, they're just the most notable. But the point remains. One can be a Christian and not believe in free will. And yet, in the minds of militant atheists, Christianity is solely dependent upon free will, and if you can prove free will does not exist, Christianity is not true. Which is why many of them actually like the idea of free will not existing, because in their minds it undermines Christianity. It's rather like denying Jesus existed. It's something that no credible historian, and yes, I know I'm wrong, many historians view Jesus as not existing, for example, Richard Carrier, but in the real world, the idea that Jesus never existed is ridiculously rejected by the academic world. But it's attractive to militant atheists because if Jesus didn't exist, Christianity is one big lie. And for the Jesus myth theory, it makes a lot more sense because Christianity is inherently based around Jesus. But Christianity is not based on free will, and there are Christians who don't believe in free will. But many militant atheists insist that without free will, Christianity does not work, and science, the thing militant atheists use that religious people shun, contradicts it. This is an example of package deal thinking. Package deal thinking is when you have an idea that you associate with other ideas as if they always go together in a package. To believe in one idea is to believe in these other ideas. And I kept running into this problem when talking to atheists, who, while claiming to be reasonable and logical and evidence-based in their thinking, quite frequently would make assumptions that were horrifically unwarranted, especially if they knew you were a Christian, or at least believed you were a Christian. I have been told by numerous atheists why my religion is bad, for instance, and quite frequently they will tear into beliefs that I hold as a Christian and tell me how awful those beliefs are, but they're beliefs I don't actually hold. Granted, some of this isn't so much package deal thinking as it is simple garden variety misrepresentation, where they will take something you said and distort it so that it no longer means what you intended, or they will take something that the Bible says and interpret it in such a way that no Christian historically has ever actually understood it, and then insist this is what the Bible really says, and thus what Christians really believe. But when it comes to package deal thinking, it doesn't really matter if they misrepresent you or not, and it is possible to take a misrepresented idea and deliver it as a package as well, by simply associating the distorted or false claim of someone's beliefs with other beliefs. In fact, this is ridiculously common, and is part of what I'll be discussing later in the video. But for right now, I shall give you a fictional example, though one not far off from real-world events. Let's suppose there's a man named James Clover, and he creates a movement in order to try and restore a certain level of legal protections in the law for religious freedoms and workers' rights and businesses' rights and things like that, typical conservative things. But he often uses the expression, persons under the law. So much so that the phrase becomes associated with him. Because he is a conservative, his liberal opponents often accuse him of racism, and, as such, have decided to interpret persons under the law to mean white people. That because James Clover is a racist, and because the people who support him are racist, they do not think of black people as persons under the law, or anyone who's not white as persons under the law. So using the phrase persons under the law to them automatically means you are a Cloverite, you follow James Clover's political philosophy, and it means you're a racist. Now, the truth is the term persons under the law predates James Clover, and you may not believe in his political ideology at all and still use the term, but to them, using the term links you to James Clover and makes you racist. What's more, they could be correct. You could be a Cloverite. You could be following James Clover's beliefs. But just because they've decided James Clover is a racist and they've decided persons under the law is a dog whistle for racist ideals, doesn't automatically mean that a Cloverite using the phrase is actually racist, or that James Clover is actually racist. It, however, would still form package deal thinking if you assume someone using the phrase persons under the law must be a Cloverite, must agree with James Clover on everything, and therefore must be racist. Package deal thinking, after all. And that brings us back to the militant atheist examples that I was using, because they don't just limit it to theology. One of the things that militant atheists are known for is being heavily critical of Christianity in terms of how it impacts society, or religion in general and how religion impacts society. But for our purposes we will limit it to Christianity because it is the most frequent target. And one of the things that you can note militant atheists do is to claim that Christianity produces hatred of outgroups. It has this us versus them tribalist thinking in which Christians are good and non-Christians are evil and Christians are opposed to them, and how Christianity generates conflict through calling others sinners and what have you, and by promoting hateful attitudes such as sexism, racism, homophobia, and other such things that Christianity naturally and inevitably breeds. If you were to tell a militant atheist that you aren't like this, neither are your churches, or that Christians in general don't really behave in a way that would make them particularly harsh towards people who are not of their race, not of their nationality, and not of their religion, that Christians aren't typically sexist, that Christians aren't typically racist, that Christians don't typically hate gay people even if they think they're sinning, and for that matter, if you were to tell them you're a Christian who supports gay rights, they will always point to another example where this is not true, or to where what they're accusing Christianity of being is true, and use that as a definitive argument that proves you wrong. I recently actually saw this happen, where someone told a militant atheist that he doesn't really believe that Christians hate people who are not Christian or who live as Christians don't expect them to, and or don't teach be morally correct. That Christians are actually rather tolerant and understanding, and that real Christians don't behave in a way that is hateful, and those that do simply aren't really Christian. And the response was to find this Baptist organization, and I can't remember its name right off the top of my head. It's irrelevant because it's not really about religion at this point. But it's the same organization that Pastor Anderson of Faith World Baptist Church belongs to. They are well known for hating non-Christian groups. They are also well known for hating certain Christian groups like Catholics. And the atheist pointed this out and said, well, they certainly think themselves as Christians, don't they? Are you arguing that these people don't really think that they are Christian? Are you arguing that they don't sincerely call themselves that? It's obvious that they are Christian. They think of themselves as Christian and believe that what they're saying is what Christians believe. And they use this to prove that Christianity is in fact a religion of hate. After all, Faith World Baptist and its associated groups within this organization, something like NIFB or something along those lines, definitely exists, and it definitely claims it is Christian, and its members obviously think of themselves as Christian, and they clearly promote hate. Pastor Anderson, for instance, has famously said we should kill gay people. Fine. It is true that the Baptist churches in this organization promote hate. Let's just give them that. The argument being made is that they have proven that Christianity is a religion of hate. The world would be better off without Christianity in it because of this group. This group fits the stereotypes that they are promoting, at least some of them. Therefore, Christians are bad people. But by this logic, even the Christians Pastor Anderson is saying aren't real Christians because they're not following the Bible. Are not only real Christians regardless, but also guilty of what Anderson accuses them of. Pastor Anderson, for instance, believes the Catholic Church is a false church, and that it is evil, it teaches damnable heresy, and that it is wrong and should not be tolerated. Because of Pastor Anderson's hatred of Catholics, Catholics are guilty of following a religion of hate. Catholics hate Catholics, which you may argue, well, it's not Catholics hating Catholics, but Catholics have the same religion, they're Christian, and while they don't hate Catholics, surely they hate everyone that's not a Catholic. It's the same thing. But is it? Is it really true that the Catholic Church teaches you to hate people who are not Catholic? And if they don't, then why are they guilty of hate because this other group that hates them exists? The simple truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter if Pastor Anderson said that we should kill gay people. You can't then proceed to go to an Episcopal church which fully includes gay people, has LGBTQ rights on its agenda, has openly gay clergy, and that performs same-sex marriages, and say, you follow a religion of hate because your religion teaches homophobia. And then say, I can prove it. Look at Pastor Anderson and his Faith World Baptist and their organization that they're in. You have the same religion Pastor Anderson does because you are both Christian. And because of that, you are homophobic. You hate gays. Pastor Anderson said we should kill gays. Shouldn't you be ashamed of that? Aren't you ashamed of that? Look how your religion makes us hate gays. You should give up being Christian. Christianity is evil. Look at Pastor Anderson. The examples of Christians behaving in a way that the militant atheist would qualify as good, such as promoting LGBTQ rights, are still guilty of spreading hatred of gays because they are Christian. But what's more important, the average militant atheist simply acts as if they don't exist. When explaining why it's okay to attack, mock, and berate Christians, they'll say, Christianity teaches sexism. It tells you that women are inferior to men. And it doesn't matter that most churches don't do this. The atheist has spoken. The Christian church won't let women be ordained, won't let women be clergy. The Christian church teaches you that being gay is a sin, so people who are gay go to hell. The Christian church teaches you to hate gay people. The Christian church teaches homophobia. The Christian church teaches racism. The Christian church teaches this. The Christian church teaches that. And the problem with this line of thinking is that they simply pretend that other forms of Christian do not exist. And quite frequently, when I've discussed things with militant atheists or have seen them speak about Christianity neutrally or on their own channels and what have you, or have seen them discussing things with other Christians either in comment sections, message boards, online in debates or what have you, it would be quite obvious that they make certain assumptions. If I tell a militant atheist I am a Christian, for example, I'm not only telling them that I hate gay people like I said earlier, I'm also telling them that I hate science. Science is evil and leads people away. We should trust religion instead of science. I'm also telling them that Evolution in particular is the most evil form, since it teaches us that God is not needed for creation. As a Christian, I reject evolution and am a young earth creationist. I shouldn't even say young earth, though. The moment I say I am a creationist, that means I believe the earth is only 6,000 years old. If you are a creationist, you are by definition a young earth creationist. And if you are a Christian, you are a creationist. And if you are a creationist, it means that you reject science, conforming to the idea that science and religion are at odds and they cannot be reconciled. Of course, this is all sheer nonsense. The truth of the matter is, one can be a Christian and accept evolution. One can be a creationist and accept that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, because there are old Earth creationists. Not all creationists think the Earth is only 6,000 years old. One can be a young Earth creationist who rejects evolution and not take a dim view of science. In fact, there are no creationists that I am aware of who actually say science is evil or science is wrong or that we should abolish science. Creationists in general have an overall positive view of science. They simply reject one theory. But saying that gets the usual response. You, as a religious person, are clearly an idiot who doesn't know what science is. A theory in science isn't the same thing as we used in popular discussion. A theory in science is something that has evidence behind it. But the way you religious people think, you think that theory means it has no evidence. Well, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying, I know what a theory is in science, and I'm not saying evolution has no evidence. What I'm saying is, no single theory, even one that is well established, constitutes all of science. If I were to reject Einstein's theory of relativity, it does not mean I am rejecting science. It means I am rejecting Einstein's theory of relativity. If I were to reject modern theories of gravity, I may be seen as a loon, but I am not rejecting science. I am rejecting gravitational theory. And the same applies to evolution. It doesn't matter if there's evidence used to support evolutionary theory or not. Acknowledging that there is evidence to support evolution is not the same thing as accepting evolution happened. But what's more important, I can acknowledge that there is evidence to back up evolution and still reject the theory, not because I'm rejecting evidence in favor of faith, not because I prefer belief without evidence in what religious texts say over science, but because I think that the interpretation of that evidence is mistaken. Rejecting the theory of evolution is not rejecting science. And yet, within the self-referential mythos of modern-day militant atheism, religion and science are at odds. Choosing religion means to reject science. Being a Christian makes you a creationist. Being a creationist makes you young earth. And being a creationist is proof that you reject all of science. It's, again, nonsense. Especially since the majority of Christians actually have no problem with evolution, and most churches don't either. But you see this quite often with militant atheists. For instance, one of the criticisms of Christianity that you will see is that Christianity is bad for the environment. The Bible teaches the earth was made explicitly for man, and man can thus use it however he wants, and this leads to environmental irresponsibility. The Bible, of course, never actually says the world was created for man. Even the evidence used to prove it does, that it says that man was given dominion over the earth, simply means that man rules the earth, not that man is the reason the earth was created. And yet, that's how they interpret it, and the atheist interpretation is always correct. What's more, even if you believe that man is the reason that earth was created, that does not mean you believe that it's okay to simply do whatever you want with it and destroy it if you like. Most churches actually do have environmental protection policies in place, and even run organizations or institutions or programs dedicated to environmental concerns. This includes the much vilified Catholic Church, which both accepts evolutionary theory and has embraced environmentalism, but also includes other mainline churches such as the Presbyterian Church, the Methodist Church, the Lutherans, the Anglicans. It simply isn't true that Christians reject environmentalism. But tell a militant atheist you're a Christian, and they think you're harming the environment. Tell them you're a Christian, you hate gays. Tell them you're a Christian, you think women are inferior to men. And so on, and so on, and so on. And that's sort of the issue. I think at this point I can move safely to politics, because I think people kind of know the direction I'm going with this. And again, it's not just militant atheists who do it. Reminding you that, though, because now I'm going to go into politics, and I'm going to be very critical of modern-day liberals. But this shouldn't be taken to mean that this is something that the liberals do. Conservatives are often just as guilty. In fact, when Barack Obama was President of the United States, many of the same things I will be criticizing in concerns of how liberals treat conservatives, especially the current President Donald Trump, were applicable to how conservatives treated Barack Obama. But Barack Obama is not president at the time of this recording. Donald Trump is. So naturally, I shall be focused on how liberals treat Trump. I'm not doing this because I myself am a Trump supporter. In fact, I'm not particularly fond of Donald Trump's methodology of being president. But I also wasn't particularly fond of Barack Obama. In a way, I suppose I'm neutral in my apathetic disdain for them. But the question isn't about my personal sentiment of Donald Trump, and it is not about my personal sentiment of Barack Obama. It is rather about package deal thinking. You see, one of the things that I have a problem with in the modern world is that people have no idea what political terms actually mean, because they are simply used recklessly, either to mean an unqualified good or an unqualified bad. A good example of that would be what we were talking about earlier in religion. Do you want to vilify a religious group? Call them fundamentalist. Fundamentalists are bad. But what exactly is a fundamentalist? Most people may say they're people who are extremist in their religion, but what does that even mean? And is that really what a fundamentalist is? The truth is, fundamentalism is not really evil. It just means sticking to the fundamentals of your faith. It does not mean you're intolerant of others. It does not mean you are hateful. It does not mean that you are an extremist. And yet the way we use the term fundamentalist, well, it's vaguely bad. It's someone wanting to force his religion on others, or kill for it, or some sort of zealot, or something along those lines. And we do the same with words like fascist. Many people on the right and left are routinely branded fascist, simply to let people know how evil they are, without actually having to explain what they're doing specifically that is evil. Rather, all we have to do is say they are fascist, and perhaps explain why they're fascist by drawing broad parallels between them and Hitler. Whether those parallels are accurate or not is also irrelevant. But these terms actually do have real meanings, and often don't apply. For instance, it is rather popular to refer to Donald Trump as a fascist. But is he? Not really. And I'm saying that not because I love Donald Trump, he can't be evil and be a fascist. I'm saying that because he is for deregulation of business and industry. You literally can't be a fascist if you are for deregulation, because fascism by its definition is for the regulation of commerce. Which is kind of a problem. You see, the left says Donald Trump is a fascist, and one of the pieces of evidence that he's a fascist is he's a racist. Since Donald Trump is a racist, and racism is a fascist trait, Donald Trump is a fascist. But I'm not even certain Donald Trump is actually racist. Is there any real evidence of that that isn't rather stupid? They'll look at quotes from his father, Fred Trump, and I have no doubt Fred Trump held racist attitudes. But Fred Trump is dead, and has been dead for decades. just because Fred Trump was racist back in the 50s, 60s, maybe even 70s, I can't remember when he died, that doesn't mean Donald Trump is racist. What's more, even if Donald Trump was a racist in the 70s, having embraced his father's racism, that doesn't mean he's a racist now. And the simple truth of the matter is, if you want to go on that kind of shaming based upon historical racism, well, let's be realistic. The Democrats in the past were racist and held racist views, especially by today's standards. The simple truth is, we are all products of our time, and while it's good when someone can rise above that, we really shouldn't judge historical events by the lenses of the modern world. I simply don't care about Fred Trump's racism because it was systemic in society at the time. That doesn't excuse it or make it good, but it does explain why people held those attitudes rather commonly and brazenly, and ultimately, it is still the past. It isn't the present. And Fred Trump isn't Donald Trump. Fred Trump in 1962 is not Donald Trump in 2019. Donald Trump in 1962 is not Donald Trump in 2019. And considering that a Ku Klux Klan member was actually a popular Democratic figure, Strom Thurmond, it seems disingenuous to continually lambast Trump as a racist based upon his father's statements from decades ago. And it's especially disingenuous when you say he is a fascist, and use racism as proof of that. Because even if Donald Trump is a racist, even if at present he holds racist attitudes, fascism isn't defined as being racist. In fact, as shocking as this may seem, you can actually be a fascist and not be racist. The idea that racism is some sort of an inherent aspect of fascism is simply not true. But what's more, even if fascism is inherently racist, even if you can't be a fascist without being a racist, so what? You can be a racist without being a fascist. And yet, we like package deal thinking. The Nazis were fascist. The Nazis were racist. Being a fascist means being a racist. It means being a Nazi. It means being like Hitler. And of course it means you hate Jews. Somehow. And I've actually seen Trump accused of anti-Semitism, which doesn't really make sense considering that his own family married into the Jewish people. His children are married to Jews. His grandchildren are Jews. He once held up his grandson and said was proud of his daughter because she's going to have a nice Jewish baby. It makes no sense to think of him as hating Jews, and yet people do. And what are their proof that he hates Jews? Well, at first, nothing, other than the fact that he's a fascist. And then later on, when actual fascist or anti-Semitic groups began supporting Donald Trump based upon the news calling him anti-Semitic, well, look, if he didn't hate Jews, why would the Ku Klux Klan support him? If he didn't hate Jews, why would American Nazis support him? It's obvious Donald Trump hates Jews. Look at who's supporting him. And it was all rather silly because, of course, the Ku Klux Klan is supporting Donald Trump. The news media has said that Donald Trump is practically a Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard. Donald Trump agrees with the Ku Klux Klan. It's not so much that Donald Trump actually said anything to encourage Klan members to support him. Rather, the news depicted Donald Trump as their champion, and the Klan members believed the news. The news created the support of Donald Trump amongst the racists, and then used the support of racists to prove Trump himself was racist. And it's all rather silly nonsense. But it's the kind of silly nonsense that you see rather routinely. And what's worse, since Donald Trump is definitely and clearly a racist, based upon the fact that he is supported by racists who were themselves inspired by the media calling him racist, well, we all know what the racists are like. You know what this means? It means he's soon going to start erecting death camps and concentration camps, because being a racist means you're just like Hitler. It's like those people who think that the Confederate States of America, had they won the Civil War, would have sided with Hitler. Now, I can't guarantee they wouldn't have. It was a good while between the two, around 60 or so years between the American Civil War and World War II. But I can tell you this. Even though the American South held obviously and clearly and blatantly racist attitudes, the American South was nothing at all like Nazi Germany, and was certainly not anti-Semitic. I know because many Jews were actually part of the Confederate government, and the Secretary of State of the Confederacy, the third highest man in all the Confederate government, was named Judah Benjamin and was a Jew. And yet, when we depict the South now, we depict them as hating the Jews, because Hitler hated the Jews, and we're projecting onto the past Hitler's attitudes because, well, if you're racist, you must hate Jews. It's a rather silly way of going about things, I think. Just because someone is a Christian, it does not mean they oppose homosexuality. It does not mean they are creationists. It does not mean that they view women as property of men. Just because someone's father was a racist 40 years ago does not mean that they today are a racist. Just because racists support someone based upon the idea that they are racist doesn't make them racist either. And yet this is the way that we tend to frame a lot of societal debates, as if believing in one thing means you fit evenly into a category of another. Well, I don't have much else to say, so I am going to sign off now. I'll revisit this topic later, but for now, thank you, God bless, and goodbye.